So, what I do want to get into then is Bill 8 that came out with the provincial government recently. It's sort of, I guess, in response to federal legislation, and it offers some different authority and powers to your role as the chief firearms officer in Alberta. Can you kind of expand on what that's about?
Sure. So, really, the bill does two things. One is that when our office took over in September of 2021, I had a larger mandate than most chief firearms officers because I was supposed to advocate for change, something that's explicitly forbidden to many chief firearms officers. And that was only in a mandate letter. But this puts it actually in legislation so that it's entrenched, a stable continuity sort of situation where this will be definitely part of the job of the chief firearms officer of Alberta. And then the second thing that it does is provide us with a couple of ways of protecting Albertans in case some of these federal laws that we've been opposing actually end up being passed despite all the evidence indicating they shouldn't be.
Okay, so would you be acting, I guess, like one of the first things it talks about in the bill is limiting the municipalities and municipal police forces from entering into firearms-related funding agreements with the federal government. Would your role be partially maybe a liaison with these municipalities and police forces so they understand where their role is going to be going forward with firearm legislation and enforcement?
Well, I think that's probably somewhat outside my role, although just about anything related to firearms ends up being referred to me for at least some opinion. But the point of that part of the law is to ensure that there is some consistency, that you don't have one municipality going along with something and another municipality not going along, and people getting a better deal in one place than they get in another place. So this ensures that there is some consistency on the side of the province in terms of whatever happens with this federal law.
Yeah, and just to clarify things, I mean, again, you're supportive of people, of course, safely and legally owning firearms, but we're not looking to allow people to illegally own or obtain firearms. I mean, that still needs to be enforced against and isn't allowed in general. Like we're seeing a lot of misinformation coming out, unfortunately, with a charged bill like this. And I mean, part of your role as well, of course, is to make sure that we stop the proliferation of illegal firearms in the province as well, right?
Well, actually, we do quite a lot of that. So you might recall that last September, we obtained funding to expand our office in order to bring back some of the work that had previously been outsourced to New Brunswick in the past. And part of that expansion will be to create a unit specifically to coordinate with law enforcement on issues related to illegal trafficking, straw purchasing, 3D printing, and so on. And so we're proceeding full speed ahead on that. And I'd also mention that we do a lot of outreach at gun shows, and that's where we can monitor compliance. And if we see that people don't understand the law and therefore they're not complying with it, we can explain before it becomes an issue.
Yeah, and you mentioned straw purchasing. Since I have you, and some people may not understand what this is, and this concerns me as well. I think most firearm owners are kind of okay with licensing individuals. We want to make sure a person isn't a known criminal or violent person before we allow them to own a firearm. But something that does happen is sometimes a person who has a pal will go out and buy a firearm on behalf of somebody else and bring it to them. And I don't want to see a registry. But this is one of the areas where people say, well, that's why you need a registry, so you know who has the firearm and how they transfer it. How can we deal with straw purchasing without a registry?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that we can do. And one is that there are a number of things that we can do. So one thing is, which we do, and which also NWEST, which is a specialized law enforcement unit on illegal firearms trafficking, one of the things we do is educate retailers so that they're aware of the kind of situations that present themselves when somebody's doing straw purchasing. So there's certain behavioral cues that they present. And so educating people is one thing. Another thing that we can do is right now, there is since last July, there has been a requirement that uh, people who are doing individual to individual transfers of non-restricted firearms obtain a reference number to demonstrate that they have verified that the person's PAL is valid, that it's not an illegal, a counterfeit PAL or a stolen PAL or one that has been revoked but somebody hasn't turned in. And so the way that in principle is a good idea, but the way they did it made it very hard for a lot of people to comply if you aren't very computer savvy, because most of these transfers happen either in the evening or on the weekends when you can't phone this office in Miramichi that gives the numbers. So what we've arranged to do with the cooperation of the registry is that I now have staff at virtually every gun show along with me, and we are able to call in on their behalf and obtain these reference numbers so that people can be sure that the person they're selling to has a valid PAL, that it's not lost or stolen or somehow otherwise illegitimate.
Well, that's great because, yeah, I mean, I'll be going to the big firearms show at the Seven Chiefs Center, for example, in early April. And I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of vendors there. And these are people who are, aficionados, enjoy their firearms. But as you said, they're not necessarily tech savvy or immersed in that sort of thing. So, I mean, if we can help them along with those sorts of confirmations without being overbearing, that's a good proactive initiative.
Well, this is the kind of thing that we want to do because, as I've said a number of times, my whole goal is compliance through credibility, not compulsion. We make things easy for people to do. We don't try and beat them into submission with a club. And, we're a regulatory agency. We're not law enforcement. And so our goal is just to ensure that it's as easy as as possible for people to comply. And then that way, law enforcement never has to become involved. They've got more important things to do, tracking down people who are actually bad guys.
Yeah. So just to kind of pivot a little more before we wrap up, and you're coming to us, I believe, from Ottawa right now. So is part of your role, because it is kind of a newer role for Alberta still. I mean, you've been at it for a while now, but is a liaison then, I guess, to speak on behalf of Albertan firearm owners to Ottawa and in capacity such as that as well?
Yes, so that's very much a part of my role. So essentially, I have a dual role. On the one hand, I have to supervise the administration of the Firearms Act, like all the licensing of businesses and ranges and so on and so forth, as it currently exists in the law. But also the second part, which is something that is really only in our case and in Saskatchewan's case, the second part of my role is to advocate to make the law actually make sense. And that's actually probably the bigger problem, because most of our laws right now have only a tenuous connection to common sense or public safety values.
Yes, and I'm glad you're speaking up to those, because again, I mean, part of your role also isn't just speaking to firearm owners, but non-firearm owners who don't understand the issue in general. So to be able to reach out, you mentioned Saskatchewan; they've brought in a similar firearm legislation as well. Have you been in much communication with your Saskatchewan counterpart on this?
Well, we talk all the time, usually several times a week, and I spoke to CFO Freeberg just this morning. So, it's we each have different circumstances because the nature of our provinces are different, and the nature of the law enforcement challenges are different. But we share a common goal of ensuring that the public is kept safe and that the law-abiding firearms community doesn't suffer a bunch of needless intrusion from people in Ottawa who don't know what they're doing.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the work you do. I mean, trying to help people in Ottawa who don't know what they're doing understand what they're doing is a big task, and I appreciate your work on that file. And of course, you're coming on today to talk to us about it a bit. Is there anything more you'd like to add before I let you go?
Well, I think one of the key things, when you look at our bill will enable us to do two things. One is, if the worst comes to worst and the feds do end up passing this bill, we'll be able to prevent some frauds through the licensing of anybody who's involved in it. And we'll also be able to create a body to provide legitimate, unbiased, solidly, empirically grounded estimates of the value of firearms so that if the feds try and take somebody's gun, that they will be under a lot of pressure to actually pay what it's worth.
Well, I guess we could hope they don't take it in the first place, but if it does come about, the compensation has to be somewhat fair. So thank you very much for coming on to talk to me today. I hope we can talk again soon, and I really appreciate that such a proactive approach to this issue.
Well, thank you. I always look forward to chatting with you, Corey.
Great, thanks, Terry.
I know.
Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited access